Throw her into the death pits, the overseer said without even looking up. She is just another Terran. That single sentence echoed through the processing chamber, and every prisoner waiting in line lowered their eyes. Some looked away because they had seen what happened to anyone sent below. Others simply did not want to remember the sound of the gates closing. Captain Hannah Brooks never looked away. She stood with her wrists locked in dull gray restraints, her dusty blonde hair cut short just above her collar, dried dirt streaked across her face, and a torn prison jacket hanging loosely over one shoulder. She looked exhausted, hungry, and painfully ordinary. Exactly the way she wanted them to see her. The processing officer slid a cracked data tablet across the metal counter. No identification, no sponsor, no value. He shrugged before stamping the file with a red clearance mark. Pit assignment approved. Hannah watched the stamp come down, but said nothing. A younger guard standing nearby frowned. Should we scan her again? He asked quietly. Terrans sometimes carry military. You think I have time to skin every piece of trash that comes through here? Overseer Crass snapped. His broad jaw tightened as he shoved the file into a growing stack. If she had mattered, someone would have claimed her already. A few prisoners exchanged nervous glances. An older miner with gray stubble leaned toward Hannah as they were pushed down another corridor. First time, he whispered. Hannah nodded once. You know what the death pits are? I have a pretty good idea. Nobody comes back. She gave him a small, almost polite smile. Some people do. The miner blinked, unsure whether she was joking. Hannah never explained. Heavy blast doors rolled open with a deep mechanical rumble, revealing a freight elevator large enough to carry construction equipment. Dozens of prisoners shuffled inside under armed supervision. The stale air smelled like rust, machine oil, and recycled ventilation. Somewhere far below, thousands of voices blended into a distant roar that vibrated through the steel floor. Entertainment day? Marcus Hale shifted beside her, rubbing sore wrists against his restraints. He looked like every overworked American freight engineer who had spent too many years hauling cargo across dangerous routes. You really think anybody survives down there? He asked. Hannah listened instead of answering. She counted. 2 guards near the rear entrance. 4 automated defense turrets mounted overhead. 1 maintenance hatch above the elevator controls. Emergency lighting running on an independent circuit. She quietly measured the timing between every security camera sweep. 5 seconds. Pause. 5 more. Marcus noticed her eyes moving. You're not listening to me, are you? I am. Then why are you staring at the ceiling? Because the cameras leave a blind spot every 10 seconds. Marcus laughed nervously. That's the last thing I'd notice. It's the first thing I'd notice. Before he could ask another question, the elevator lurched downward. The chains rattled overhead as the platform descended hundreds of feet beneath the arena complex. Every prisoner grew quieter the farther they dropped. Some prayed. Some cried softly. Others simply closed their eyes. Hannah did none of those things. Instead, she studied reflections in the brushed steel wall, watching every guard without making direct eye contact. Old habit. Stay unnoticed. Stay underestimated. Stay alive. Crass's voice crackled through the overhead speakers. Welcome to the death pits. Outlive today's games, and maybe you'll earn another sunrise. Laughter followed from the control room above. Hannah finally spoke, her voice calm enough that Marcus almost missed it. He enjoys saying that. Who? The overseer. Marcus swallowed. How can you tell? Because people who enjoy power always repeat themselves. The elevator slowed before stopping with a hard jolt. Massive gates stood only a few yards ahead. Beyond them, the distant crowd erupted into thunderous cheers, hungry for another spectacle. Marcus's breathing grew faster. Hannah reached down and quietly tightened the torn sleeve covering her left arm, making certain the fabric still hid the weathered metal chain resting beneath it. Hidden underneath the cloth, pressed against her shoulder exactly where no careless inspection had reached, was a Terran military identification tag scratched from years of service. Nobody had checked. Nobody had asked. And somewhere above them, Overseer Crass had just made the most expensive administrative mistake of his entire career. The gates groaned open inch by inch until the arena exploded into view. Marcus froze where he stood. Nothing about the place resembled the simple fighting pit he had imagined. The death pits stretched across what looked like several football fields, carved into dark stone and surrounded by towering steel walls layered with observation decks. Thousands of spectators packed the balconies above, cheering, laughing, placing wagers, and waving brightly colored banners as though they had arrived for a weekend sporting event instead of watching desperate people struggle to survive. Bright floodlights swept across the sand while enormous display screens introduced each incoming prisoner as nothing more than inventory numbers. Hannah stepped onto the coarse red earth and immediately felt the dry heat rising beneath her boots. She ignored the noise. She ignored the crowd. She focused on the details that actually mattered. Wind direction, distance to the nearest barrier, location of every gate, the rhythm of the rotating security drones circling overhead. Marcus stared at her in disbelief. You are doing it again. Doing what? Looking everywhere except at the crowd. Hannah answered without turning her head. The crowd cannot hurt me. The people controlling the exits can. Before Marcus could respond, another prisoner stumbled beside them. She was a woman in her early 30s with dark brown hair tied into a loose ponytail and a pair of cracked medical glasses hanging from her shirt collar. My name is Lena Ortiz, she said, trying to steady her breathing. I worked at St. Joseph Medical Center in Houston before my transport was attacked. Marcus gave her a tired nod. Marcus Hale, freight engineer. Lena looked toward Hannah. And you? Hannah hesitated for half a second. Hannah, that is all. That is enough. Lena noticed the answer, but chose not to press further. A loud horn echoed through the arena. Every conversation stopped. A towering alien announcer stepped onto an elevated platform, spreading all four arms toward the roaring audience. Welcome to another glorious day of trials. Remember our one and only rule. Survival earns another chance. Failure entertains everyone else. The audience answered with deafening applause. Several armored guards escorted a group of frightened prisoners toward the center of the arena. They were carrying simple work tools instead of weapons. Marcus frowned. What are they supposed to do with shovels? Hannah watched a distant gate slowly unlocking. Those are not weapons. Then why give them anything? Because somebody wants them to believe they have a chance. Marcus felt a chill despite the heat. The enormous gate across the arena began sliding upward. The crowd immediately grew louder. Something heavy moved behind the shadows. Nobody could see it clearly yet, but every spectator already knew what was coming. Lena instinctively stepped backward. Please tell me this is another show. Hannah quietly shook her head. No, how do you know? Listen. They fell silent. Beneath the cheering came another sound. Metal scraping against reinforced flooring. Slow. Deliberate. Controlled. Whatever waited behind the gate was not charging. It was walking. Hannah narrowed her eyes. It is trained. Marcus looked at her. How can you tell that from footsteps? Wild animals rush. She kept watching the darkness beyond the gate. Professionals do not. Marcus stared at her for a long moment before asking the question that had been bothering him ever since the processing center. Who exactly are you? Hannah answered with the same calm voice she had used since arriving. Today, I am just another prisoner. At that exact moment, every screen inside the arena suddenly changed. The unknown creature disappeared from the display, replaced by the image of a towering armored figure carrying a long ceremonial spear. The announcer's voice boomed across the entire complex. Citizens of the Empire, prepare yourselves. Your undefeated champion has chosen to enter the arena personally. The crowd erupted with excitement. Marcus felt his stomach sink. Hannah did not move. She simply exhaled once, slowly, and fixed her eyes on the opening gate as the first heavy footsteps of the Empire's champion echoed across the sand. The champion stepped into the light without a hint of urgency, and somehow that made the entire arena even quieter. He stood nearly 8 feet tall, his polished armor reflecting the floodlights as if it had never known defeat. A long ceremonial spear rested comfortably in one hand, more like a walking stick than a weapon. The giant alien paused at the center of the arena and slowly looked across the prisoners one by one. He was not searching for the strongest opponent. He was deciding who would make the audience cheer the loudest. The announcer stretched out every word. Citizens, you know him well. Undefeated for 47 consecutive trials. Guardian of the Imperial Games. Champion Drogath. The crowd answered with thunderous applause. Drogath raised one hand without smiling. He had done this too many times to enjoy the attention anymore. His eyes eventually settled on Hannah. She was standing slightly behind Marcus and Lena, shoulders relaxed, hands hanging naturally at her sides. Unlike everyone else, She was not staring back at him. She was studying the distance between the champion and the nearest support pillar. Drogath tilted his head with mild curiosity. You. His translator delivered the word in smooth English. Look at me. Hannah slowly raised her eyes. I see you. The champion expected fear. Instead, he found the expression of someone waiting in line at a grocery store. It irritated him more than open defiance ever could. Do you understand where you are? He asked. Yes. And you still refuse to kneel? Hannah glanced around the arena before answering. Nobody asked politely. A ripple of laughter spread through one section of the audience. Another section booed immediately afterward. Overseer Crass leaned forward inside the control booth, his jaw tightening. Wipe that attitude off her face, he muttered into his headset. The champion knows what to do. Marcus whispered through clenched teeth. Please stop talking. Hannah did not even look at him. He started the conversation. Lena could not believe what she was hearing. Are you trying to make him angry? No, Hannah kept watching Drogath. I am trying to learn something. By insulting him. By listening. Drogath slowly circled the small group, each step measured and balanced. His posture revealed years of disciplined training instead of reckless confidence. Hannah noticed the subtle shift in his weight whenever he turned his left foot. Old injury. Probably the knee. His grip remained strong, but the spear always rested slightly lower during the turn. Habit, not weakness. She continued watching. Marcus leaned closer. You keep looking at his feet. That tells me more than his face. Drogath suddenly stopped walking. Interesting, he said. Most prisoners stare at my weapon. Hannah answered calmly. Professionals watch balance. The champion's eyes narrowed for the first time. That was not the answer of an ordinary captive. High above them, Crass frowned. How does she know that? One of the arena technicians shrugged. Lucky guess. Crass folded his arms. Nobody guesses like that. Before he could think further, another official entered the control room carrying a fresh stack of prisoner files. Late processing reports, she said. System synchronization was delayed again. Crass waved dismissively without turning around. Leave them. The stack landed on his desk untouched. Buried somewhere inside was Hannah's incomplete intake report, still missing the encrypted military archive that had failed to upload during processing. Nobody noticed. Down in the arena, Drogath lowered the tip of his spear until it rested against the sand. You have composure, he admitted. That is rare. Hannah gave a small nod. You have discipline. That is rarer. Marcus stared at both of them in complete confusion. This sounded less like enemies preparing for a public contest, and more like two experienced professionals quietly sizing each other up. The crowd grew restless. They had paid for excitement, not conversation. Boos echoed across the stadium. Crass slammed a fist onto the railing. Enough talking. Begin the trial. Warning sirens flashed around the arena walls. Massive steel gates started unlocking one after another. Hannah heard the heavy mechanical clicks and immediately looked away from Drogath toward the opening passages instead. The champion noticed the shift instantly. You are not worried about me, he said. Hannah answered without hesitation. You are not the first problem. A deep metallic roar echoed beneath the arena floor, followed by several synchronized gate locks releasing at exactly the same time. Whatever was about to enter had not been part of the original introduction, and even Drogath slowly turned toward the darkness with a look that suggested he had not expected this either. The arena lights dimmed for a heartbeat before every warning beacon flashed bright crimson. One massive gate after another rolled open, releasing clouds of dust across the red sand. The crowd jumped to its feet, sensing something different. Even the announcer paused as though he had not expected the schedule to change. From the shadows emerged three enormous quadrupeds, each nearly the size of a pickup truck, their thick armored hides covered in old scars earned from years inside the arena. Heavy restraint collars still hung around their necks, dragging broken lengths of chain behind them. They spread out instinctively instead of charging together, surrounding the prisoners from different angles. Hannah watched them for barely 2 seconds before she spoke. They hunt as a pack. Marcus looked at her in disbelief. That is what you notice? That is what matters. Lena slowly backed away. We cannot outrun those things. No, Hannah agreed. But we do not need to. Marcus stared at her. You have another plan? Hannah pointed toward a cluster of broken stone columns standing about 40 yards away. Move there. Why? Because only one of them can reach us at a time. Marcus blinked. You figured that out already? I figured it out before they opened the gates. The first creature let out a deep rumble and started forward, not sprinting, but testing the distance exactly the way a trained working animal would. Drogath quietly stepped aside instead of intercepting it. He had expected a formal duel, not a survival exercise. His eyes remained fixed on Hannah. She had not panicked. She had not frozen. She had immediately chosen terrain. That was military thinking. High above the arena, Overseer Crass leaned toward the chief technician. Why release all three? The technician looked confused. The central system authorized a level 4 trial. I did not authorize that. Neither did I. Crass frowned. Someone had modified the event schedule, or the ancient arena software had done it automatically. Either way, the audience loved the surprise. Hannah reached the broken columns first. Marcus. Yeah. Pick up that metal rod. This. Yes. Marcus grabbed a rusted support bar half buried in the sand. Lena. What? Stay behind the center pillar. I am not leaving you. Hannah looked at her for the first time since entering the arena. Good. Then stay where I can see you. The nearest creature accelerated. Sand sprayed behind its massive feet as it closed the distance. Marcus tightened his grip on the metal bar so hard his hands trembled. It is coming right at us. Hannah remained perfectly still until the last possible second. Not yet. Marcus almost shouted. Now would be a great time. Not yet. The animal lunged around the edge of the stone pillar, expecting frightened prisoners to scatter into the open. Instead, Hannah stepped sideways just enough to force it into a sharp turn around the narrow space. Its own speed carried it farther than intended, slowing the pack for a brief moment as the other two adjusted their approach. Move, Hannah said calmly. The three humans shifted together to the opposite side of the columns before the animals could surround them again. Marcus looked back in amazement. You planned that? No, Hannah kept scanning the arena. I expected something similar. Drogath watched every movement with growing interest. She had never tried to overpower the creatures. She had simply redirected them, using spacing, timing, and obstacles. It was efficient, disciplined, and strangely familiar. Who trained you? He asked across the arena. Hannah did not answer. She was counting again. One security drone crossed overhead. 5 seconds later, another replaced it. The same blind spot. The same rhythm she had noticed before entering the arena. She looked toward the eastern wall where a maintenance access door sat beneath the spectator platforms. Locked, but connected to the emergency corridor. Marcus noticed her eyes shift away from the creatures. What are you looking at now? Hannah answered quietly. Our way out. Before Marcus could respond, one of the towering creatures suddenly stopped chasing them altogether. It lifted its head toward the control tower instead, ears twitching as if it had heard a command nobody else could hear. Then all three animals turned at once, no longer interested in the prisoners, and began moving toward the center of the arena where Champion Drogath still stood waiting. Even the champion tightened his grip on the spear, realizing whatever command had just been issued was never meant for the prisoners alone. The arena fell strangely quiet. A moment earlier, thousands of spectators had been cheering for another entertaining trial. Now, every voice disappeared as the three creatures stood perfectly still, staring toward the control tower instead of the prisoners. Hannah noticed it immediately. Something had changed. This was not part of the performance. This was a command. Marcus lowered the metal bar in his hands. Tell me I am not the only one who thinks that was weird. Hannah kept her eyes on the creatures. You are not. Lena looked between them. Then what is happening? Hannah did not answer right away. She was watching the arena staff, not the animals. Guards along the upper platforms were moving differently. Their posture had changed. They were no longer watching the prisoners. They were watching each other. Someone inside the control room was nervous. The plan changed, Hannah finally said. Marcus frowned. Whose plan? That is what I am trying to figure out. Across the arena, Champion Drogath slowly lowered his spear. The confidence he had carried moments earlier was gone. He looked up toward the observation deck, where Overseer Crass stood behind a glass. You changed the trial parameters, Drogath said through the arena communication system. Crass pressed a button on his console. The audience requested a more interesting challenge. Drogath did not move. I was not informed. You are the champion. Adapt. A quiet tension spread through the arena. Hannah noticed it. Drogath was powerful, but he was not reckless. He understood something was wrong. He looked back toward Hannah. You knew? It was not an accusation. It was a question. Hannah shook her head slightly. No, but you expected it. I expected someone here to make a mistake. Drogath studied her for a moment. You speak like someone who has spent years around command decisions. Marcus looked at Hannah. You want to explain that? She ignored the question. The nearest creature moved again, but this time it did not approach. It walked toward a small section of the arena wall where a maintenance panel had opened. Hannah immediately noticed the movement. There. Marcus followed her eyes. What? That door was not supposed to open. Lena looked confused. How do you know? Because nobody opened it for us. Hannah started walking. Marcus grabbed her arm lightly. Wait. You are walking toward the suspicious thing. Yes. That is usually the part where people make terrible decisions. Hannah glanced back at him. Only if they stop thinking. They moved carefully toward the maintenance area while Drogath remained several yards away, observing them. The crowd began shouting again, demanding action, but the excitement sounded forced now. Something about the situation had changed, and everyone could feel it. Inside the control room, a technician suddenly stood up from his station. Overseer, we have a problem. Kras turned sharply. What kind of problem? The technician hesitated. The prisoner database finished synchronization. Kras froze. And the technician looked at the screen. The Terran female's identity file was incomplete because the military archive was encrypted. So unlock it. The technician swallowed. I did. A long silence filled the control room. Kras stepped closer to the display. Read it. The technician looked at him. Are you sure? Kras's expression hardened. Read it. The screen displayed a single line of information. The technician's voice became quieter. Captain Hannah Brooks. Terran Defense Forces. Special Operations Division. For the first time all day, Overseer Kras had no immediate response. The woman he had classified as worthless was not an unknown prisoner. She was a trained military officer whose identity had been hidden behind a security clearance higher than his entire facility access. That is impossible, Kras whispered. The technician shook his head. No, Overseer. The impossible part is that we put her down there without checking. Back in the arena, Hannah reached the maintenance panel and placed her hand against the damaged access screen. The system rejected her. Marcus watched her closely. You have done this before, haven't you? Hannah looked at the locked panel. Something similar. You are not just some soldier. A brief silence passed. Then Hannah looked toward the control tower, knowing someone up there had finally discovered the truth. No, she said quietly. I am someone they should have identified before opening that gate. Above them, the arena screens flickered. The prisoner's name that had been displayed as a simple number disappeared. A new classification replaced it. The entire arena watched as the words appeared across every screen. Captain Hannah Brooks. Terran military. And for the first time since the games began, the crowd was no longer cheering. They were waiting to see what happened next. The arena screens remained frozen on one name. Captain Hannah Brooks. Terran military. Special Operations Division. For several seconds, nobody moved. The spectators who had been shouting moments earlier now sat in complete confusion, trying to understand why a prisoner they had ignored was suddenly someone important. Inside the control room, Overseer Kras stared at the display as if the words themselves had betrayed him. Change it, he ordered. The technician looked up. Overseer, remove the classification. Put the old information back. I cannot. Kras stepped closer. You run this system. The technician swallowed. The archive has already authenticated her identity. The system cannot override a verified military record. Kras's expression hardened. He hated losing control more than anything else. Not because Hannah was dangerous. Not because she was a soldier. Because for the first time, the entire arena was watching him make a mistake. Then we adjust the situation, Kras said quietly. Cancel the trial. The technician hesitated. The audience will notice. Kras looked toward the arena below. The audience notices whatever we tell them to notice. Down on the sand, Hannah stood beside Marcus and Lena, watching the screens change. Marcus let out a slow breath. So everyone knows who you are now. Hannah looked toward the control tower. Not everyone. Lena followed her gaze. What do you mean? They know my name. Hannah paused. They do not know what it means. Drogath approached slowly, his spear resting against his shoulder. The champion who had entered expecting another easy victory now looked at her differently. Not with fear. With respect. Captain Brooks. Hannah turned toward him. You read quickly. My people study their opponents before battle. Smart habit. Drogath glanced at the screens. Your identification was hidden. Yes. Why? Hannah looked around the arena, at the prisoners, the guards, the cameras, and the thousands of people who had watched without knowing the truth. Because sometimes people reveal more when they think you have nothing. Drogath considered that answer. You allowed them to underestimate you. No, Hannah shook her head. They chose to. Before Drogath could respond, the arena lights suddenly shifted. The doors around the outer walls began closing. The prisoners noticed immediately. Marcus looked up. That does not look good. Hannah watched the movement carefully. It is not. Lena frowned. Why would they close the exits now? Hannah did not answer because she already knew. Kras was not trying to protect the arena. He was trying to protect himself. The speakers activated again. Attention. Due to an administrative error, the trial will continue under revised conditions. The crowd reacted with confusion. The announcer's voice became louder. The champion will proceed with the final evaluation. Marcus stared at the control tower. He knows who you are, and he is still doing this. Hannah's eyes narrowed. That is what people do when admitting a mistake costs them more than making another one. High above them, Kras watched through the glass. If she survives, the arena looks weak, he told his staff. If she fails, nobody asks questions. The technician looked uncomfortable. Overseer, that is not a legal adjustment. Kras turned toward him. Do you know how many officials have watched these games? He pointed toward the audience. Do you know how many careers depend on this place continuing? The technician lowered his eyes. Kras was no longer trying to win. He was trying to erase evidence. Back in the arena, the remaining security gates opened one by one. The creatures from the previous trial moved away as new training drones descended from the ceiling, their movements controlled by the arena system. The crowd began cheering again, but this time the sound felt different. They were no longer watching a helpless prisoner. They were watching someone who had been underestimated. Hannah looked at Marcus and Lena. Stay behind me. Marcus gave a nervous laugh. I was afraid you were going to say that. You have a better idea? He looked around at the massive arena surrounding them. Honestly, no. Hannah nodded once. Then she looked directly at the control tower where Kras was standing. For the first time, he realized something important. The death pits were designed to test prisoners. But Hannah Brooks was not trying to survive the arena. She was studying the people who built it. And now she knew exactly who needed to answer for it. The arena changed the moment the first security drone descended from the ceiling. This was no longer a performance. Everyone could feel it. The prisoners who had been watching from the sidelines understood first. The rules had shifted, and not in their favor. Hannah stood in the center of the arena, looking up at the machines hovering above. Their movements were precise, controlled, and completely different from the creatures released earlier. These were not animals following instinct. These were tools designed by someone who wanted a specific outcome. Marcus looked around nervously. Tell me you have a plan. Hannah kept her eyes on the drones. I have several. That is not the same as having a good one. For the first time, a small smile appeared on Hannah's face. You are learning. Lena stepped closer. What are we supposed to do? Hannah pointed toward the maintenance corridor behind the arena wall. Get there. Marcus followed her finger. The locked door. Not locked anymore. How do you know? Because they are using too much power controlling the drones. Hannah glanced toward the control tower. Someone upstairs is distracted. Inside the observation room, Overseer Kras watched the arena feed with growing frustration. Everything should have been simple. The prisoners should have been confused. The crowd should have been entertained. Instead, every decision he made seemed to prove Hannah's point. She was not reacting to the arena. She was reading it. Increase pressure, Kras ordered. The technician looked uncomfortable. Overseer, the system is already beyond standard trial settings. Then make it memorable. That is not what the arena was designed for. Kras turned sharply. Do you want to keep your position? The technician looked down and said nothing. Back below, the drones moved closer. Hannah waited. She did not rush. She did not panic. Marcus noticed and shook his head. You know, most people would probably be running right now. Most people are watching the wrong thing. What are we watching? Hannah pointed upward. The operators. One drone moved slightly slower than the others. A tiny delay, less than a second. Almost impossible to notice. But Hannah noticed. There. Marcus looked confused. There what? A weak connection. Lena stared at her. You found a weakness already? No. Hannah moved toward a damaged section of the arena floor. I found a mistake. She picked up a loose piece of metal from the ground and placed it near the edge of the maintenance panel. The drone above adjusted its position automatically, tracking the movement. That was exactly what she expected. Marcus watched carefully. You were testing it. Yes. Why? Hannah looked up. Because whoever built this system expected prisoners to fight. They did not expect anyone to study the system itself. The drone changed direction again. Hannah moved at the same moment, not fighting the machine, but guiding its attention away from the others. Marcus and Lena quickly moved toward the corridor entrance. The crowd began shouting, confused by what they were seeing. They had expected chaos. Instead, they saw a single prisoner calmly walking through an impossible situation as if she had done it before. Drogath remained near the center of the arena, watching silently. He finally understood something the others had missed. Hannah was not stronger because she could defeat everything placed in front of her. She was stronger because she refused to let others decide the conditions of the fight. You are not trying to win, Drogath said. Hannah paused briefly. No, then what are you doing? She looked toward the control tower. Ending this. The words traveled through the open communication system. Krass heard them clearly. His expression changed. She is threatening me? The technician slowly looked at him. No, Overseer. Then what? The technician glanced at the arena screen. She sounds like she already decided. For the first time, Krass felt something he had not expected from a prisoner. Not fear. Not anger. Certainty. He quickly accessed Hannah's military file again, searching for anything that could give him control. The information was limited, but one line remained visible. Previous assignment, classified. Combat history, restricted. Clearance level, command authority. Krass stared at the screen. Who are you? He whispered. Down below, Hannah reached the maintenance door. The panel flickered once, then opened. Marcus looked back at the arena behind them. We are actually getting out? Hannah stepped into the corridor. Not yet. Lena frowned. What do you mean? Hannah looked up toward the hidden cameras lining the walls. Because leaving quietly would only let him do this again. The corridor lights activated one by one, revealing a path deeper into the facility. Somewhere above them, alarms began sounding across the death pits. Krass had finally realized the truth. The prisoner he threw into his arena was not trying to escape. She was coming for the people who put her there. The maintenance corridor beneath the death pits was nothing like the arena above. There were no cheering crowds, no bright lights, no banners celebrating the Empire's games. Only cold metal walls, narrow walkways, and the quiet hum of machines working behind layers of reinforced panels. Hannah moved quickly but carefully, with Marcus and Lena following close behind. Marcus looked over his shoulder every few seconds. I have to ask, are we actually escaping, or are we walking into something worse? Hannah continued forward. Both are possible. That is not exactly comforting. It is realistic. Lena studied Hannah for a moment. You always talk like that. Like what? Like every disaster is just another problem on a checklist. Hannah finally slowed down. Because panic does not change the situation. That sounds exhausting. A brief silence followed. Then Hannah nodded slightly. Sometimes it is. It was the first time either of them had heard something human in her voice. Not the calm soldier. Not the person who seemed impossible to surprise. Just someone who had been carrying responsibility for too long. They reached a security junction where 3 corridors connected. Hannah stopped. Marcus almost walked into her. What happened? We are being followed. Lena looked behind them. I do not see anyone. Exactly. Hannah pointed toward the floor. Too clean. Marcus stared. You can tell someone is coming because the floor is clean? No. I can tell because the dust pattern changed. Marcus shook his head. I am starting to understand why they were afraid of you. Before they could move, a voice echoed through the corridor speakers. It was Overseer Krass. Captain Brooks. Hannah looked up. There you are. Krass sounded different now. The arrogance was still there, but something underneath it had cracked. You have caused considerable disruption. Hannah answered calmly. You locked civilians in an illegal arena. The death pits are an approved imperial tradition. Traditions do not make something acceptable. Krass paused. You still believe you are in a position to judge this facility? Hannah looked at the security camera above her. No, she stepped closer. I believe the evidence is. Marcus looked confused. Evidence? Hannah tapped the side of her wrist. Hidden beneath the damaged prison uniform, a small indicator light blinked once. Lena noticed first. You recorded everything. Hannah nodded. From the moment we entered processing. Crass went silent. For the first time, he understood. Hannah had never been trying to escape unnoticed. She had been collecting proof. Every conversation, every command, every decision. The system had been watching her, but she had been watching it too. You cannot release anything from inside this facility, Crass said quickly. Hannah looked toward the nearest terminal. That is what you think. She connected a small device from beneath her sleeve to the access panel. The screen flickered. Marcus stared. You had that the whole time? Yes. And nobody found it. Hannah looked at him. Nobody checked. The same words hung in the air, but now they carried a different meaning. Crass had made the same mistake twice. He had underestimated her. Alarms suddenly changed tone throughout the facility. Not emergency alarms. Communication alarms. Every screen in the corridor activated at once. The Death Pit's internal network had begun broadcasting outside the arena. Lena looked at the screens. What did you do? Hannah watched the data transfer begin. I sent a report. To who? Before Hannah could answer, every display showed a new symbol. A simple blue and white Terran emblem. The entire facility recognized it immediately. Marcus stopped walking. That is not a normal military symbol, is it? Hannah remained quiet. Crass's voice returned through the speakers, but this time the confidence was gone. Captain Brooks, listen carefully. You do not understand the political situation here. Hannah looked directly at the camera. No, Overseer. I understand it perfectly. If you expose this facility, you will create a diplomatic incident. Good. Crass froze. Hannah continued. Maybe someone finally notices. The corridor lights flickered as the transmission continued. Outside the planet's atmosphere, far beyond the arena walls, an encrypted Terran signal had reached its destination. A message marked with military priority. A message containing the location of a hidden prison facility. And attached to it was the identity of the officer who had been thrown into the death pits by mistake. Back inside the control room, Crass watched the incoming confirmation appear on his screen. His face lost all color. The technician beside him whispered, Overseer, what is that? Crass stared at the symbol. He knew exactly what it was. A Terran recovery request. Not a threat. Not a warning. Something much worse for him. Official attention. Hannah looked at Marcus and Lena. Now we leave. Marcus looked toward the distant alarms. And what happens to everyone who did this? Hannah turned toward the control tower above them. That is why I stayed. Far above, the arena gates began unlocking one by one. But this time, they were not opening for a new trial. They were opening because someone powerful had finally arrived to ask why a Terran captain was ever placed inside one. The first thing the galaxy saw was not a fleet. It was a question. A single transmission from a forgotten corner of Imperial space appeared across diplomatic networks, carrying one simple message. Why was a Terran military officer found inside an illegal death facility? Within hours, the answer traveled farther than Overseer Crass ever imagined. The death pits had always survived because nobody looked closely enough. The Empire called them tradition. The wealthy called them entertainment. The prisoners called them a place where people disappeared. But now, for the first time, someone had forced the galaxy to look. The outer gates of the facility opened as Terran recovery ships descended through the atmosphere. They were not there to conquer. They were not there to make speeches. They arrived because one of their own had been found where she never should have been. Inside the facility, Marcus stood beside Hannah and watched the guards slowly step away from their stations. I have to admit something, he said quietly. Hannah glanced at him. What? When I first saw you in that processing line, I thought you were just another unlucky person. Hannah gave a small nod. Most people did. Marcus smiled slightly. That was probably the biggest mistake everyone here made. Lena looked at Hannah. Do you ever get tired of people underestimating you? Hannah was quiet for a moment. She looked back toward the arena, the place where hundreds of people had been treated like numbers instead of lives. Yes. Marcus seemed surprised. You do? Of course. Hannah looked down at the identification tag hidden beneath her uniform. Being underestimated is not a compliment. It means someone decided they did not need to understand you. Those words stayed with them as they entered the main control room. Overseer Crass was still there, standing behind his console, surrounded by silent technicians. The same man who had ordered prisoners into the arena now looked smaller than the room around him. Captain Brooks, he said, you have no idea what you have started. Hannah walked forward calmly. Actually, I do. Crass forced a smile. You think your government will punish everyone involved? You think the galaxy will change because of one facility? Hannah stopped a few feet away. No. I think change starts because someone decides one person matters. Crass had no answer. For once, his usual excuses did not work. There was no audience to impress. No crowd cheering. No system protecting him. Only the truth sitting in front of him. The investigation that followed became one of the largest political scandals in Imperial history. Records from the death pits revealed years of hidden operations, illegal prisoner transfers, and officials who had ignored warnings because admitting the truth would have been inconvenient. The facility was shut down permanently. The prisoners were returned home, and the people who had been treated as entertainment finally had their names restored. Months later, Hannah stood on a Terran transport platform preparing to leave. Marcus approached carrying 2 cups of coffee. I figured after everything, you deserved something normal. Hannah accepted the cup. Thank you. Marcus looked at the ship waiting behind her. Do you ever stop? Hannah looked at the stars above them. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Sometimes I remember why we do this. Lena joined them, smiling softly. Because of people like the ones down there? Hannah nodded. Because nobody should have to prove they deserve to be treated like a person. The 3 of them stood quietly as the transport engines began to power up. Across the galaxy, people would continue telling stories about the day an unknown prisoner walked into the death pits and changed everything. Some would remember the officer. Some would remember the rescue. But the people who mattered most remembered something simpler. A mistake was made because someone failed to look closer. And everything changed because one person refused to believe that anyone was disposable. As Hannah boarded the ship, Marcus looked at the empty arena behind them one last time. The place built to make people feel powerless was silent forever. And somewhere beyond the stars, a lesson traveled farther than any fleet. Never judge what you do not understand. Never ignore the quiet person in the room. Because sometimes the person everyone overlooks is the one who has been holding the line all along.